And so I would like to introduce our three presenters today, Nathan Parker, Danae Hernandez-Cortes, and Hanna Breetz, who are all ASU assistant professors who are going to be discussing what will transportation electrification do for air quality in your city. So you're all very distinguished, and so I'd like for you to briefly each introduce yourself and your research, and then we can go ahead and hand it over to you for a presentation. So I'm going to start with Nathan as our faculty advisor. And so tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your areas of concentration.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Nathan Parker. I am assistant professor in the School of Sustainability. So now that we're in the EV work group, I have a PhD in transportation technology and policy. So it's very relevant to the EV work group, which is a rare occurrence that my PhD matches up with something. But in that, I do work looking at the future of alternative fuels. And what I have specialized in is creating spatial models of what these alternative fuel infrastructures and use might look like in order to better understand what they're going to cost and what impacts they're going to have on the environment and on people. And so that's what my goal is, to try to get out ahead before things happen and make the best educated guess we can have on what's going to happen and what are the drivers of what's going to happen. So that's what I do, and I'll pass it to Danae.
Thank you, Nathan. Hi, everyone. Nice talking to all of you. My name is Danae Hernandez-Cortes. I'm also an assistant professor at ASU. And compared to Nathan, I work exposed most of the time, not in this project, but I work with analyzing policies that have already happened and trying to understand the impact of these policies on air quality and environmental justice. In particular, some of my biggest questions is, how do we enable energy transitions that can be equitable and just for disadvantaged communities? Most of my work has been done in California, but now I have a research agenda trying to focus on issues within Arizona and specifically within Maricopa County. So I'm very excited to be part of this project as well. And I will pass it to Hanna.
Hello, everyone. I am also an assistant professor in the School of Sustainability at ASU, but whereas both Nathan and Danae are kind of quantitative modelers in different ways, I am like the qualitative person in this group. So I'm trained as a political scientist. I study energy policies, electric vehicles, biofuels, some renewable electricity stuff, but more from the kind of stakeholder perspective and trying to often understand the stakeholder interest and policy processes of how these policies get made. So the three of us kind of came together as faculty, and then we also have in this group 2 graduate students who maybe could kind of briefly pop in and introduce themselves as well, because they're going to be helping us with this modeling work as well. So you should sort of recognize their names and their faces. So Deepti, why don't you go first, if that's all right, and then Andrea.
Yeah, hi, I'm Deepti Paul, and I'm doing my PhD in sustainable energy. I'm in my first year, and my research mainly focuses on EV adoption, applying computer science skills, machine learning, and data science in EV adoption models. And yeah, so I'll pass it to Andrea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Cordova. I am a second-year PhD student at School of Sustainability in the program of Sustainable Energy. And my research focus is on electric vehicle adoption in a just and equitable way. In the city of Phoenix at the moment, I'm focused on understanding how charging infrastructure is being deployed in multifamily housing buildings at the moment. And I also want to understand how electric vehicle adoption can have an effect on environmental justice and air quality as well in the city of Phoenix.
Should I just get going then?
Sure, great. And I just want to know if you want to take questions in the chat or in the middle, or would you like to keep questions till the end?
Questions can come at any time in any form. If you just feel like shouting out at me, I'm happy with that. Or I will try to, I have my chat up enough that I can see it, so I should be able to capture that. And this is going to be a fairly short presentation. We are hoping to have a discussion, so hopefully you all are happy to talk at the moment. So with that, I will get started. So what we're trying to do here today is introduce this project we're starting, and we are trying to bring you all in at the beginning of the project instead of at the end of the project, which is what normally happens, because we want to understand what you all want to find out. We are building models to try to understand how electrification can impact air quality in Maricopa County. And how we build those models will affect how we can actually, what questions we can actually answer. So being able to get feedback from you all early on in the process means we can make models that are much more responsive to the questions that people actually want to know the answers to. I'm going to give a brief, really quick background of why I am interested in doing the work or how we're doing it. The first thing is that air quality, air pollution is not uniformly distributed. We get, the Valley has non-compliance days. That's how the regulatory nature of air quality is registered. But if we go down fine scale, we can see that there's really wide range differences in air pollutants across a neighborhood, and that the air pollution is currently concentrated near highways often, and that's because of our internal combustion engine vehicles. And this is why we think EVs are one of the answers, major answers to air quality problems. This study is really fun. They put air quality monitors on Google Street View cars, so they're able to capture air quality measurements along all the streets. So there's the grid is because all the measurements were along the streets, but you can see the highways are much worse than the neighborhoods. And some of the neighborhoods where there are intersections there where trucks are idling a lot, they have really bad air quality in those really localized areas. And that really matters for the people who are in those localized areas. And so that's what we're interested in. And the other part of this that I am also think is important to think about is the disparities between who is generating the emissions and who is being exposed to the emissions. So this is a map that is just representative. It's a map from Montreal, I believe. But the thing here is the darker areas are people who are being much more exposed to emissions than they are generating the emissions themselves. And so you see this on places like along highways, where the folks who are commuting in from far subways are producing a bunch of emissions, while the people who are on the highway are being exposed to those emissions. And they are not necessarily generating nearly as much emissions as those folks who are going from afar. Sorry, I am doing. So the other part of that study is that the people who are more exposed than who generate are most likely disadvantaged communities. Those are not the rich people who are facing exposures that they are not generating. So what are we trying to do here in our project? We're trying to evaluate different scenarios of electrification and how those impact air quality fairly locally in Maricopa County. So we're trying to get spatial models of where emissions occur and how that might impact the people where those emissions occur. And with electrification, you have a few things going, really have two things going on. One, you have reductions in many kinds of air pollutants due to not having a tailpipe on the vehicle, but then you have potentially increases in emissions from the power generation. And so we're looking at both of those things. How vehicles charge are going to affect which power plants provide the power, and therefore how much emissions are associated with that. And that can be a really very different thing in Arizona in the summer. At the peak time, you might have at peak at noon, you would have a lot of solar that might have gotten not utilized that goes to powering our vehicles, especially in a future scenario where we have greater solar. But if you go down to when the sun's going down and the air conditioners at home are ramping up, you're going to see the peaker power plants, which have much worse emissions than the average emission power plant in the state. And some of those are located in communities, and those can be so those are the folks who may suffer from this electrification aspect, or maybe just balance out, but we don't know. And so that's what we are trying to do. So that's what we're trying to do. We don't want this to be an academic exercise. We want to answer questions that are useful to the community. And that's why we are here. And kind of going forward, we're going to be creating these models over the summer. We're going to want to meet with folks more, hopefully at some point. Those who are really interested in helping us, we'd like to meet with you again at the end of the summer to develop scenarios that we are going to be analyzing. We're going to do the work, and then we want to come back and tell you all our findings and provide some materials so you can take them and show them to other people. So, because you all are the informed group, so we want to give you some materials to help inform others as well. So I'm just going to show a few maps from Maricopa County to get a feel for the layout in a different way. So this funny shape here is Maricopa County, as you probably know. We have, where is my, oh well. Could you see my cursor then? Yay, okay, then I can point. We have, so we have two maps here. One is share of the population in each census block group, that is people of color, and then also median income. And for equity purposes, we're generally interested in higher share of people of color, whether they are being disproportionately affected by the policies or the change in this, how we move around. And then median income, the lower income folks. And so these maps are pretty close to mirror images of each other, which is not what you would like to see, but that's what it is. So the light areas where there are a lot of people of color often are the dark areas where you have low income. And for power plants, which is what these black dots are, there are some located in those communities. There are actually a couple that are located out here in other communities as well. And then if we look at the highways, I zoomed in the highways a bit. So on just the kind of the city area where we have multiple highways running through this light area, but we also have there's some traffic flow going through here. And then you can see a little better zoomed in here where the different groups in terms of low income and people of color match up or not. Danae, do you have anything you want to add here, or should I just keep bumbling along?
No, that is very good, especially considering that they are kind of related, very related. So some areas where there's very high shares of people of color are also areas that have low income. So mainly, for example, in southern Phoenix, and that is also along with some areas that are located near these highways. So we see this spatial correlation, and if we think what Nathan told us in the beginning, that these researchers have shown that the pollution tends to be located considerably closely to these highways, then you can think that since these highways are also placed near these areas that have both high shares of people of color and low income, then some of them will experience these pollution impacts coming from coming from these mobile sources or these cars. So some of this is interesting because then you can think that some effort trying to electrify these cars could help these communities as well. And that's something that we're interested in the project.
We also have the highway here, but we also have a power plant, fairly similar location. So if you are moving from gasoline cars, putting the pollution out on the roads, to the charging of the vehicles demanding more electricity just from that one power plant, in an extreme case, then you might have a negative effect in that area. So I wanted to give an example of what we mean by scenarios. So to help you wrap your head around this. And so what we're thinking about scenarios are kind of discrete stories about how transportation electrification could occur. And then we can compare that story with a baseline. And so this story is centered around electrification of local delivery fleets. So we had a conversation with the city of Phoenix and a little while ago, and they pointed out a lot of interest in the medium duty, more heavy duty vehicle electrification for air quality improvements. And this is one place where it could happen, where your local delivery fleets leaving the distribution centers or warehouses and delivering within the city could have a major, significant impact on air quality. I have mapped out here the distribution centers and warehouses in the city. The orange ones are Amazon, because there's so much Amazon. And then the blue ones are other places, Walmart, some of the grocery stores and the like. But you can see here this nice concentration of distribution centers in this area of low income and high people of color. So that is an area where there's currently a lot of emissions coming from these heavy duty vehicles, medium duty delivery trucks. And if we can develop a scenario of those vehicles being electrified and how that would play out in the city, we can see how the reduction of localized air pollution could happen and could have major benefits in these areas around the distribution centers. And then also on the valley air quality as a whole, in terms of reducing the NOx load in the valley. So last real slide I have here is to think about some things that I have thought about, but this is not an exhaustive list, and I'm really interested in your ideas. What would lead to different results in terms of being different electrification scenarios? So one is, who is adopting EVs? Are we getting heavy duty vehicles adopting EVs in the distribution center case, or do we have expansion of our current EV adoption until you saturate the market of rich white males who own homes, who are the predominant owners of EVs currently? Or do you have a more uniform adoption of EVs, Or you could even think about a targeted policy, like a cash to clunkers kind of policy, where you're trying to get those highly polluting vehicles off the road, and getting adoption in lower income neighborhoods where the more highly pollutant vehicles are. Another variable, I'm a modeler, I call these things variables, are when do the vehicles charge? And not necessarily giving me exact times, but thinking about in terms of policies that could influence when things are charged, instead of just a charge this time, charge that time, but thinking about whether there are real policies or rate structures that could maybe impact this. Infrastructure, I know a lot of the cities are working on siting chargers. There's also the money coming from the federal government to site chargers, and those are going to go along major highways. And so the question is whether any of those could be utilized to increase adoption in neighborhoods where it would lead to improvements in air quality. And then the evolution of electricity supply is going to change things as well. And we're trying to keep this relatively short term in terms of modeler academic land, looking out only to 2030 instead of really long term, where we think you could envision a 100% clean electricity supply in the state. So at that, I would like to start a discussion about kind of going back, I guess, to my initial questions I had, which are, what do you want to know about electric vehicles, air quality, and equity? And are there particular scenarios you think would be useful to you in your work on EVs in your cities?
Hi, Nathan, this is Mackenzie. I know that we spoke a little bit about this already, but just, to start the discussion with the group, the electrification of transit buses. And yeah, we would be happy to share that data and contribute however we can to see any scenario like that modeled out.
Excellent. Yeah, we talked about that for a different project we were trying to fund. Hopefully that one also.
Oh, that's a different one? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one with more money behind it if it actually gets funded. So we can do better.
Okay, I thought that you got a different grant for the same project. So okay, well, either way, happy to provide data.
But that's a good scenario, and we could do that. And the thing that would be different from this versus that project that we've talked about previously is that in this project we're going to stop at emissions. We aren't going to do the air quality modeling where we actually mix the ozone with the VOCs to find out how much ozone there is. But we will have more. I think it's probably going to be more useful for particulate matter and toxics.
Okay.
But it'll be useful. It will also help in knowledge about. It's leading towards understanding ozone as well.
Especially considering that one of the important variables, as Nathan mentioned, was time of charging. And if we also have these scenarios can create a bigger picture of the load that will be required. So this could be very, very helpful. Thank you, Mackenzie.
That's a really great scenario that we could, and since you are happy to give us data, that'll give us a really robust scenario we could run.
So Nathan, I included Robert Vandenacker's question about ozone in the chat. While I was in my last meeting, I did some calculations based on if the EVs are charged on the natural gas power plants operating in Arizona. So the average emissions from the natural gas power plants in Arizona, you end up with NOx and NOx emissions that are very similar to a new car.
a new gasoline car. So in Arizona, we're going to have not 100% natural gas providing your electricity, though it may be the place where you get your marginal electricity to power your vehicle. But if you're charging at night and such, you're probably getting some fraction of it's going to be from nuclear. Some's going to be from hydro, some's going to be some solar. So some currently is going to be from coal as well, which is going to be worse. But that coal power is not in the valley. It's an important aspect for air quality. Those are someone else's problem, I guess. But I didn't get to the other part of the ozone equation, which is the VOCs. But my understanding in Arizona, we are NOx limited in our ozone, and therefore more VOCs is less important. VOCs are less important in terms of ozone formation than NOx is. And if anyone really wants a rundown of ozone as not really a pollutant versus something that's emitted, it's the pollutant we care about, but it's not what's emitted from our vehicles. We emit the things that lead to it.
So Nathan, just staying on this ozone train for a quick minute, because I think this is something that we're seeing regionally. Maricopa County is, as I think probably everybody on the call knows, is not in attainment for federal air quality standards, ozone being one of them, particulate matter being another. But that ozone, I'm especially interested because it is getting worse, and we're likely to be reclassified to a stricter regulatory sense. So when you talk policy, we're seeing this play out right now. And so any opportunities into the future to kind of look at how can transportation technology or policy aid in meeting our air quality standards, kind of flip the script on it, instead of looking at what is the impact of EVs on air quality, saying, what level of impact would we need in order to meet attainment if we were going to use the tools that transportation electrification offers. That sounds like that's outside of the scope of what you're doing right now, though.
Danae, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, we are not going to look at attainment per se, but the way that we're looking and the framework that we're using is basically completely right along the lines that what you're saying. So we're hoping that the adoption of EVs could substitute away emissions that could reduce air pollution, increase air quality, and therefore that could be one of the drivers driving attainment of some. So that's completely in line. I think the attainment could be a little bit challenging per se because they sometimes take a longer time to verify, and it's more about and that's something that we haven't considered, but we can for sure mention it and try to look at some of the policies that the EPA considers for attainment that could inform our modeling as well. So this is super helpful. And repeatedly, this is exactly what we're thinking of. How can these EVs adoption policies improve air quality such that we can have better air quality throughout the valley, but also trying to look at where this air quality might be more might be located such that we can relate it to our equity work as well.
Yeah, and I think I'm really excited about this work, and I think it times in really well. Nathan, you mentioned the federal funding. So a lot of us cities right now, we're focused on, what is going to be the best use of federal dollars if we are successful in getting that. Because many of the cities on this call are looking at how can we collaborate on a joint proposal. And so having this kind of information, it can be a tool for us. We know that the federal funding, so the notice of funding opportunity has not been released yet, but we're expecting that early this fall. And so this project could time out really well, so we could actually have more knowledge going into that grant application. And for that reason, even though the NOFO hasn't been announced. We know that it'll include charging infrastructure. And so that one that you touch on there on this slide, the influence of infrastructure, I think would fit in really well with federal funding timing. And I see John has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. Has your model that you're setting up for research, does that include the differences, especially in Maricopa County, but in Arizona in general, because we have not just interstate traffic, but international traffic for large delivery vehicles, semis, what have you. Do you know, let's say that successfully Amazon, I'll exclude municipal impact on their transportation system and buses, et cetera. But let's say Amazon decides that their delivery trucks are going to go EV. What impact have you been able, or do you have any ideas on how you'll be able to differentiate that from interstate and international truck driving? What impact will that have? Let's say we get Amazon, FedEx, UPS to adopt a policy of electrification. What will be the impact of that as opposed to semis and other forms of large transportation of goods?
That's a really good point. Being able to separate out what's local versus what's passed through, and so much of the freight traffic on Arizona roads are pass through traffic, and so what we are trying. So we have not gotten this done set up yet, and making this a priority, I think is a good idea. But we are working with MAG for their transportation modeling work that they have done, which gives the flows of various types of vehicles projected out into the future, but also where they originate and where they end. And so for that way, you can separate out what's local from what's passed through. So I think we'll be able to do it. I don't have the data in my hands yet, so I can't say for sure, but I am optimistic we'll be able to do that.
That's cool. Just one final question on that. In your conversations with local government, have you, or are you planning to discuss with the private sector, the delivery companies and the trucking companies and all the transportation and logistics companies about their efforts towards EV and electrification?
I'm looking hopefully at Hanna.
Yeah, I'll take that. So let me give a little bit further background as to kind of what we're envisioning with this particular project, because I think just to give it a little bit of context, this is like a very specific modeling exercise that we hope is going to build out into some larger exercises and projects kind of spinning out of it. So with this particular project, we're kind of hoping to be building some initial emissions reduction models. So, I mean, this is what kind of Danae was getting to earlier, saying we can't quite, in answering the other Danae's question, about saying we'd love to get at the air quality questions. We can't quite get there because we're only in this particular project looking at the emissions reductions, not the air quality impacts. And in order to do that, so like in this, we're really focused on just starting to say, what would be hypothetically some of the emissions reductions impacts of various scenarios of electrification. And in order to do that, we do want this to be as much as possible in conversation with different stakeholder groups, but we're also pretty limited in terms of this being like a 6-month project. We're funded from now until December, and that's it. So we're having to be pretty focused in terms of like whose input we're taking right now to get these initial models built and to get those initial scenarios created and modeled. Going forward, we would love to have this be something that we could be building out where we start to say, and that's why we've sort of focused on having conversations with cities to say, what are your interests in, like, which types of emissions are you most interested in having modeling? How are you thinking about different electrification scenarios? What segments of vehicles would you like to know about? What would be the impacts of their electrification and so forth? Once we have these kind of initial estimates of saying, under these different scenarios, here's how much you would see reductions of different types of scenarios, of different types of pollutants, and especially how those relate to low income and other disadvantaged communities. Once we have that initial body of research, I would love to see that be something that we then start to use in conversation with the private sector, with other sorts of adopters, as ways of potentially saying, hey, here's some of the benefits that you could be looking at. Or at that point to have like a more robust realism check on some of the scenarios. We'd also like to think about building it out into doing some air quality modeling. So those deeper levels of stakeholder engagement, as well as those next levels of air quality emissions modeling, are both directions. I know you only asked about one, but the other ones come a bit too. They're both directions that I think we would love to move in, but within the 6 months brackets of this particular project, we're mostly just focusing on talking with cities first. That said, if you have recommendations of specific people that you're like, you know, dude, you got to talk to this person, or you got to talk to this group, or you really should check with this other, you know, and I can help you with some of the networks or contacts, you know, we would be open to that. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. It looks like Yasmin had her hand up with a particular question. Yasmin?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. So yeah, I have a question about the EV adoption. So I want to know if you're also looking for determinants of EV adoption, or you're assuming that particular groups of people will going to adapt the EV technology. And also, are you looking to understand what will cause more people or federal government or local government or neighborhoods to adapt EV as much as they can?
So there is quite a bit of EV related research going on that the three of us have our fingers in. This project is going to be more of a storytelling where we are going to say, well, imagine this, and what would the outcome of. There is another project that Hanna is heavily involved in that is doing survey work with low-income communities to understand determinants of EV adoption for that group. So we have we are involved in research, but that is related to that, and we are hoping to use some of that research to inform how we create our stories. But yeah, so we're hoping we're going to utilize some of that as much as we can. But this project is not going to be a determinants of EV adoption project.
Gotcha, thank you.
Does anybody else have any input or questions?
Yeah, one more, just I guess thing to think about, obviously coming from the bus side here, but potentially school buses might be another one to look at. I know that there's been a lot of momentum in that space, and there should be grants coming out, federal grants, I believe at the end of this year, that'll be supporting schools to be able to make those transitions. So I'd imagine that having information like this, if that could get connected with some of the school districts here that are applying for grants, that would probably help them out quite a bit.
School buses are fun.
They are fun.
Because they have, like, I mean, their emissions are right where we don't want them. And therefore, getting them to not have emissions is great. They also have very interesting drive cycles and times when they could be charging that could match up with solar nicely.
Yeah.
That would make them a really great candidate. And also a great candidate to provide backup power to the grid, because they're gonna have to have big batteries.
Yeah, and especially they are located very near residential locations, and they often serve disadvantaged communities as well. So I think that this could be a very interesting set of scenarios. So I think that we could definitely think on how to incorporate this into our scenarios for studying these different impacts, especially because they are heavily localized in neighborhoods as well. So yeah, that's a very good idea. Thank you, Mackenzie.
No problem. And I unfortunately give that recommendation without a connection or any way to get in contact with these schools. But yeah, if it's possible, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think that that's also one of the programs that CHISPA had also supported in the past, trying to develop some school buses. If anyone here has information about that program, will be great. But I remember when I talked to them, they were supporting some of these transitions as well. So I think that this could be a very good idea to at least consider for our scenario development. Thank you.
And actually, if I could broaden or kind of build on that to broaden out to a larger question for this group as a whole. I mean, when we think about the different segments that might be looking at electrifying transportation, so we have, you know, the heavy and medium duty for all kinds of different purposes. That includes delivery vans, that includes all kinds, you know, trash trucks and school buses. Then we have, you know, passenger fleets and light duty fleet. Within that, though, we might be able to separate just like regular people driving their vehicles versus ride hailing / ride sharing. So we've got all these different kind of use segments and vehicle segments. And I would be curious to know, as a group, when you think about those different potential batches or segments of adopters, which of them are you, from a city perspective, kind of most interested in understanding the impacts of electrification, or in thinking about like, we'd really love to target, or we imagine that we'd like to see growth most in, you know, X segment? Is it the school buses? Is it the delivery vans? Is it, I mean, I'm sure the answer is, oh, we'd like to see all of it, but like, where are your kind of, even if it's implicit, priorities in terms of kind of what you're most curious about and what seems to be most important from kind of policy perspectives?
I'll take the first leap at that, but then I would love to hear Karen's take on it too. For a city of Avondale, the majority, just over half of our emissions come from transportation sector. So this is greenhouse gas emissions. And of that, the lion's share, 60% is from personal vehicles. And so those are really looking at those light duty vehicles. We have the I-10 that runs through Avondale, like many of our cities. So we see a lot of traffic that way. So that's the segment that we think, or that Avondale would be most interested in learning. How do we encourage adoption there? It's also the most ripe for residents to be able to afford light duty electric vehicles. There's a bigger market for that. I'll leave it at that. Karen?
Yeah, I would echo what Danae just said. I think and City of Phoenix is mostly concerned with equity areas, which is a part of that light duty segment. You know, we're 517 square miles. We're got a large geographic area, 5th largest city in the US. Although we have a downtown core, it's not as dense as some other large cities. However, we are getting more and more multifamily residential downtown. So as much as I think we need to focus on light duty in terms of the entire city, I'd also like to throw out anything from the last mile deliveries. So if our cores are really congested and busy, and I don't think this just applies to Phoenix, but kind of looking at, if we were to use a policy to limit internal combustion engines in a mile from the downtown core, what kind of impact would that have on our downtown core? That's just a side comment, but I echo Danae and the population that I'd want to see looked at, and it's the light duty with the emphasis on the equity areas.
And I will say, sorry, I keep jumping in, but I would love to, so on tech, like on top of what Karen was saying on those equity areas, if we're talking about air quality, a lot of our cities don't have good local data for air quality. So like those maps that you were showing, if that is something that's within the realm of possibility. I don't know if you can hire Google Street View to just go out and get street level data for any of the communities within 6 months, but that is something that we have, like an air quality monitor that's not even in our city. That is our closest thing. So so really to help address these issues would be to understand where is the air quality the largest, where is it most challenging or burdensome.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that we don't know what we don't know. And I think those pictures I was giving were to try to point out that there is a really big difference locally, and our air quality modeling does not show that. It's not designed to show that. And so you can't necessarily help it. What we can do here is model it, which is not the same thing as having real data, but it can be suggestive of where you might want to collect real data. So I think it is going to be a worthwhile exercise to use the models as potentially a way to identify areas where running some of those Street View like air quality monitoring would be most useful, or where putting mobile air quality monitors for short periods of time would be useful. I know we have some at the university here. I don't believe I have permission to use them, but there is. I was trying to find. I was discussing with Mike Chester, who's a professor in engineering, and he says that him and someone else have attempted to do some mobile air quality monitoring in the Phoenix metro area, but I haven't seen the results of it. So I can follow up with him and see what he has.
I know we have a few other communities that are attending the call. So we've got Mesa, we've got Buckeye, and I'm sure there's a couple other, we've got Peoria and so forth. So I was interested in finding out, even Tucson, if any of the other communities have any input for you as well.
Well, I wanted to kind of share, this is Tonya Glass. I work for SRP MIC, but I also serve on the Levine Village Planning Committee for the City of Phoenix. And I wanted to share a success. Over the past 2 years, we've been asking multifamily developments to incorporate EV charging facilities and infrastructure to their new builds. Well, we had a case in which we talked to the attorney and the developer, and unlike the other developers who agreed to have that incorporated into their project, this developer agreed to add a stipulation to their zoning for the project. The City of Phoenix, once they reviewed it, they tried to change the language to take the teeth out of the stipulation, because as we know, there's no formal ordinance regarding multifamily. But the developer, as well as the Planning Commission, agreed to the existing stipulation language that held them accountable for the infrastructure and the charging for this particular development. And this developer has several projects coming in the community. Levine Village has in excess of 6,000 units planned, multifamily units planned. And this last one, and this developer really has some teeth in the language and will uphold their promises. But I feel that the tables turned a bit with the multifamily. I think they kind of got the message now that this is happening. It's not an if, but when. And it's more of let's be ready instead of get ready. So I think this was, despite some of the apprehension from the City of Phoenix planning, I think this was a win and a testament to what we can look forward to going forward with multifamily.
Danya, can you share your information if you're happy with us reaching out to you? Andrea and I would really like to talk to you about the multifamily stuff. So if you feel comfortable sharing your information with one of us, our emails are, I just put them up again, either Andrea or me, Nathan.
All right, I will take the information real quick. And I'd be happy to share because I think this is a grassroots endeavor and it needs to happen locally in the neighborhoods to encourage our politicians and help people craft effective language going forward.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. It's something it's a different route than I've heard in terms of conquering that problem. And we're spending a lot of time trying to talk with developer, or actually building managers and developers on multifamily and how they think about the charging infrastructure.
Yeah, so far we have not had any negative reactions. Again, so many units are coming in, and so the charging has to start at home, whether that's a single family home or a multifamily dwelling. So we continue to have these conversations over the last few years, and we have received positive results. But of course, it's not until it's built that we know if it really works. So
Great, thank you. I seem to recall somebody having their hand up, and I apologize, it looked like it went down. So did somebody have a question or an idea? No? Any other input from communities for our presenters on their research?
I think there was a question by Dustin Fitzpatrick on PM10 and move. So I can read the part of the question. It says that for PM10, move's model is showing future emissions dominated by brake wear and tire wear, with exhaust accounting for incrementally less. Will heavier vehicle weight and faster acceleration increase tire wear emissions with EV transition? And whether we are also modeling PM10 emissions for the neighborhood effect, the net effect. And I can say about the PM10 emissions, we are currently not going to model per se how, well, we are not going to model the concentrations in those neighborhoods, but we're going to model the emissions. So that is something that we can do, but I don't think we're considering these other force affecting. Nathan, do you have ideas on how we could consider those?
Maybe Deepti might have some answers, but Deepti has been working with the MOVES model to develop our emission factors for the conventional fleet versus the replacement EVs. And this is definitely a point where EVs are not going to have zero emissions. They're going to have these emissions are going to exist, and they are heavier vehicles, and therefore the tire wear should be more. They are going to have regenerative braking, so the braking should be less. So what is the net effect of that? I don't know right now, but I think by the end of this project, or by the end of the summer, Deepti and I will have a good answer to that from our exploration of the problem. And so we will be including that as part of the delta in emissions when you replace an EV or replace an internal combustion engine vehicle with an EV.
Dustin, did you have any other questions?
And thanks, that's great that they'll be evaluated.
Great, okay. I just had a couple of quick comments in the chat with regards to the potential for including like construction related type vehicles, or even the impacts of Uber and Lyft. When you look at some of those different scenarios, are those options?
So Uber and Lyft, I don't think we will be able to do Uber and Lyft exactly tracked where Uber and Lyft are more active than less active. But we can do EV of Uber and Lyft instead of cars, and the difference being the more mileage travel of the Uber and Lyft vehicles will lead to a greater fraction of vehicle miles on the road will be electrified with less vehicles being electrified. So that is definitely something we can capture. I think Hanna was trying to lead a question to see if anyone was really interested in that question or not. So I think it's definitely something we can do. It's also something that will take a little bit of thought to do well. And so it might be a question of whether people are interested in it or not, whether it gets done.
Okay. All right. Great. So Nathan, to wrap this up, can you just remind folks about the schedule that you have, because you have a very tight time frame. You have to be done by the probably middle of December. And as far as meeting frequency, and if people are interested in providing you additional feedback, I guess between now and December.
Yeah, so our sketch out of our time frame is that we are going to work over the summer to develop the models, get them in place, get it working. And so that would be middle of August or late August. We're hoping to have functional models that can give us results, and we can do simple scenarios based on those. And my plan was to try to come back to an interested group, maybe not your full group and take up your time, but to identify people who are interested and have a workshop to work through some of the scenario ideas and solidify those ideas, and then run that work through probably through October, and hopefully in November we would have results that we could come back and present before Thanksgiving, so that we can do our write-ups and stuff, so we're done in the middle of December.
Sounds like a sprint.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Any last information you want to provide to the group before we move on?
The only thing I would like to find out who would be interested in doing that early fall, late summer input. I don't know whether, I mean, we could just probably send an announcement through you and get whoever's interested could show up, or instead of doing your meeting, or if you feel like using the meeting, then we can do that too, if there's enough of the group that's interested.
I was going to say, we'll just put it in the chat too, and they can respond as well. So you'll have an idea, because it looks like Danae already mentioned she would be interested too.
I think Danae was there.
So great.
Hoping Karen's involved. It's interested.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your presentation and your interest in including the input and ideas of the communities in your research. As we say, we need to be youth inspired. So I think it's really important for communities to have that opportunity and a say in what, will serve them best. So yeah, I will certainly make this recording available afterwards as well to maybe those that were not able to attend. And please keep me posted on your upcoming opportunities for communities to participate so we can advertise that. You'll probably get a few more, I would imagine, that will join and want to provide that input as well. So great. Thank you so much for your information, Danae and Nathan and Hanna. Can't wait to get your model up and running so we can put it to the test. Danae and Karen, any final words as co-chairs to our presenters?
Just thank you. And we look forward to any input and information and data that you can provide, because as Danae mentioned, we are at a bit of a deficit on some information and statistics and modeling. So appreciate ASU's involvement and being a great partner with all communities and anybody else that wants to be involved.
Thank you all for having us here. It's great.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.